My daughter Emma has recently discovered that toy stores exist. This is a problem, because now every time we go anywhere that even vaguely resembles a place where toys might be sold, she suddenly develops a very intense emotional connection to something she saw approximately 5 seconds ago. Most of the time I can steer her away before things escalate, but last month she found something I unfortunately could not argue against. It happened at a flea market about 20 minutes outside town. My wife loves those places. Old kitchen stuff, antique picture frames, things that somehow cost more because they're older. Emma is 6, which means flea markets usually bore her to death. She spends the first half hour dragging her feet behind us while my wife looks through tables and boxes full of things that apparently belonged in someone else's house 30 years ago. Eventually, Emma finds something she can pick up. That morning, she found it sitting on a folding table between a cardboard box full of plastic dinosaurs and a pile of stuffed animals that looked like they had survived several generations of children. It was a Furby. Now look, I know people joke about those things being creepy, but I remember when they first came out. Every kid wanted one. I never actually owned one myself, so when Emma picked it up and immediately started laughing at the weird noises it made, I didn't really think much about it. The guy running the table said we could take it for $2. Emma looked at me with that hopeful face kids instantly produce when they think they're about to hear the word no. $2 seemed like a small price to make her happy for the rest of the day. So, I paid the man, and we went home with what Emma had already decided was her new best friend. She named it Oliver before we even pulled into the driveway. The toy looked a little worn, but otherwise fine. Some thin patches in the fur. One eyelid blinked slightly slower than the other. But when Emma put batteries in it, the thing immediately came to life and started speaking in that weird nonsense language they all seem to know. For the next hour, she sat on her bedroom floor, talking to it, while my wife and I made dinner downstairs. Every now and then, we could hear her laughing through the hallway. At one point, she came running into the kitchen just to show us that it could dance if you tickled its stomach. I remember thinking it might have been the best $2 I'd spent in a long time. That night when I tucked Emma into bed, she asked if Oliver could stay in her room. I didn't see any reason to say no, so I placed the toy on the dresser across from her bed, turned off the lights, and closed the door while she was already halfway asleep. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I thought I heard her talking. At first, I didn't get out of bed. Kids talk in their sleep sometimes, and Emma had done that before. But after lying there for a minute, I realized the voice I was hearing sounded strange. It had that slightly mechanical tone toys make when the batteries are starting to die. So I got up and walked down the hallway. When I opened Emma's door, the room was dark except for the small nightlight beside her bed. She was asleep under the blanket, breathing slowly, and the Furby was sitting on the dresser exactly where I had left it. Its eyes opened. Then it made a soft, giggling sound. I figured the thing must have turned itself on somehow. Considering how old it probably was, that didn't seem impossible, so I picked it up, opened the battery compartment, and removed the batteries before setting it back down. The eyes closed immediately, and the toy went quiet. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The following night, I heard the sound again. This time, it wasn't laughter. It sounded more like whispering, very faint, but definitely coming from Emma's room. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway thinking maybe the batteries hadn't been completely dead the night before, and the toy had somehow managed to start itself again. When I opened the door, the room looked exactly the way I had left it. Emma was asleep, the nightlight was still glowing beside her bed, and the dresser stood across the room where it always had, except the Furby wasn't on it. For a moment, I assumed Emma must have knocked it over earlier, and I simply hadn't noticed. Then I saw it. The toy was sitting on the floor near the foot of her bed. That alone didn't bother me. Kids move toys around all the time. What bothered me was that it was facing the doorway. Its eyes were open. The whispering stopped the moment I stepped into the room. I picked the toy up and checked the battery compartment again just to make sure I hadn't imagined removing them the night before. It was still empty. I stood there for a while listening to Emma breathing before finally putting the toy back on the dresser and going to bed. By morning, everything felt a little less strange. Emma woke up in a good mood and immediately carried Oliver downstairs with her, talking to it while my wife and I spent most of the morning cleaning the house. For most of the day, nothing seemed out of place. Emma sat in the living room with the toy beside her while she colored, occasionally pressing its stomach to see if it would start talking again. Without batteries, it stayed quiet, which was reassuring enough that I eventually stopped thinking about it. At one point, Emma asked if we had seen our neighbor's cat. It was a big orange thing that wandered through everyone's yard and usually ended up sleeping somewhere near our back fence. I told her I hadn't seen it that day, and the question didn't really stick with me at the time. Later that evening, after dinner, I took the Furby out of Emma's room and put it in the hallway closet. I didn't tell her the real reason, I just said Oliver probably needed a rest for the night. She looked disappointed but didn't argue, which I took as a small victory. Sometime after 1 a.m., I woke up to a faint rustling sound coming from the yard behind the house. That night was warm enough that we left the bedroom window open, and the sound really travels in the dead of night. At first I stayed in bed, listening, trying to decide whether it was just something moving along the fence line. The noise continued for several seconds, uneven and shifting, like something moving through the grass. Then, I heard the whispering again. It was the same one I had heard the night before. It was a thin, uneven murmur that drifted through the open window. I got out of bed and walked to the back door. The moment I stepped outside, the sound stopped. The yard was still and quiet, the grass barely moving in the faint breeze coming through the alley behind the houses. I walked along the fence line and looked around for a minute or two, but didn't see anything out of place. Eventually, I went back inside and closed the door, telling myself it had probably been a stray animal passing through. The next morning, our neighbor knocked on the door. He asked if we had seen his cat. Apparently, it hadn't come home for more than a day. The two of us walked around the yard for a while, checking along the fence and behind the shed before we found it lying in the grass near the back corner of the yard. Something had gotten to it during the night. The orange fur around it was flattened into the dirt, and the body looked badly torn up. My neighbor let out a quiet sigh and rubbed the back of his neck while he looked at it. We both stood there trying to figure out what could have done it. The strange part was that nothing about it made sense for this neighborhood. We don't live near woods, and the dogs around here are all pets that belong to families on the street. My neighbor didn't say much after that. He looked at the damage for a long moment and muttered that maybe a raccoon or a coyote had passed through during the night, though neither of us had ever seen one anywhere near the neighborhood. We ended up digging a small hole near the edge of his yard and burying what was left of the cat before either of us went back inside. I didn't mention the noises I had heard during the night. That afternoon, Emma spent most of her time in the living room coloring while my wife worked in the kitchen. The Furby stayed in the hallway closet where I had left it, and I tried not to think about it too much. Later that evening, after tucking Emma into bed and finishing up my work, I heard the whispering again. This time it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the hallway. I stepped out of my study and listened for a moment. The sound was faint, but it was definitely coming from the closet where I had left the toy. When I opened the door, the whispering stopped immediately. Inside the closet, the Furby was sitting on the shelf where I had placed it. Its eyes closed a second later. The plastic beak twitched slightly, as if something inside it had just finished moving. For a moment, I could have sworn the toy had been looking straight at me before it went still. I reached in and picked it up. The battery compartment was still empty. But around the edge of its beak there were several short strands of orange hair caught between the plastic seams, and something dark had dried along the corner. When I saw the fur caught along the edge of the beak, something in my stomach dropped.